7 banks to do business in Kenya, or even 7 banks to actually borrow or do business with them. I'm gonna mention that. And by the way, for your information, I can verify and justify where I'm getting this information is from this newspaper. I love consuming, and I'm not advertising them, by the way. By the way, if they will see this and get it, we can partner. Anyway, I studied this information from this particular newspaper, and it was from 31st of October 2025 all the way to 2nd of November 2025. Business Daily. It is actually there. The cheapest and costliest banks for personal loans revealed. And obviously by default, it also means it's also worst for your business. And I'm going to list them starting from the first one all the to the 7th one, which is the worst. So you better stick around, watch this video to the end so that you understand if you want to take a loan and what have you, which banks will you go for. And at the end of this video, again, stay put, because I'm going to share with you a bank that is a hidden gem, that is the cheapest, the friendliest that you can actually do a business. Again, don't forget, this is not a paid advertisement. I am not advertising. I'm just reporting this news so that you can consume it. All right, let's get into the business. Don't forget to hit that like button. Make sure that you subscribe, leave a comment on the comment section, and as well at all the time, don't forget to say something on the comment section. I do believe you also have something that I can also learn from you. The 7th one, as far as the doing business is concerned, is the Standard Chartered Bank. Are we together? Standard Chartered Bank is one of the banks that is a bit expensive. What are the parameters? I've actually studied this particular newspaper, and what they are saying, if you borrow an equivalent of 100,000 Kenyan shilling from this bank, and assuming you are to pay that particular loan in 1 year, and you borrow from Standard Chartered, you're gonna pay 15,000 Kenyan shilling as the interest. You see why I said it's the worst for business? At the end of the day, if you get charged a lot of interest for your business, it's not really a good thing. But when you get a friendly interest, that again is... By the way, I don't know whether you guys know this. You know the Kenyan banks are defiant when it comes to business. Why? Because they have been told by the Central Bank of Kenya. Remember this, I've been telling you this. The Central Bank of Kenya are reducing, or they are lowering the rates every day, every time. All the way from 14 or 13% each there, you can verify. Right now as we speak, we are at 9.25. But the banks are not lowering the rates. You hear that the bank has the CBK has lowered the rates with more than several base points. But the banks lowers with a very, very small magnitude. That is affecting a lot of business in Kenya. That's why you heard that borrowing in Kenya to do business is actually a shoot in the foot. Unless if you know that your ROI, that is the return of an investment, for that what you've borrowed, you know it is high. That is the only time it makes sense to borrow in Kenya. Anyway, the Standard Chartered, if you borrow an equivalent of 100,000, that's like $1,000 each there. You're gonna return with around 150 or less in terms of the interest at the end of the year. So very simple. If you borrow 100,000, you say you're gonna pay at the end of the year, you're gonna pay that 100,000 obviously with the interest of 15,000. The 6th worst bank to do business in Kenya, again I'm studying this newspaper here, is the Paramount Bank. Paramount Bank, if you borrow an equivalent of 100,000 and you're supposed to pay that money in a period of 1 year, then it means you have to pay back an interest of 15,380 Kenyan shilling. That is what you have to return there. That is quite over a big return. That is over 15% in terms of a return. So if you check from the 9.25%, the base point for the banks, all the way to 15%, that is quite of a thing. That is quite of a thing. And I can tell you that is a bit expensive. All right. Now, the 5th bank that is worst to do business in Kenya as far as the interest is concerned, this one gonna be a bit controversial because it's one of the giant banks we have in Kenya. And I know probably some of you will be touched differently. I'm also a consumer of the bank. So I'm not speaking as somebody who is an outsider. I'm a consumer of the services of that particular bank. And I remember it was my first bank I opened here in Kenya. And I do not have anything wrong or a problem with them in particular as a bank, but I'm just reporting what is reported there. I know I have always to say this, yeah? Now, that bank is none other than the Equity Bank. The Equity Bank, if you borrow 100,000, and you have an arrangement of paying that money in a period of 1 year, can you imagine this? You're gonna pay 23,785 Kenyan shilling. Oh my goodness. You people, even if you are a worst mathematician, that's like over 20% of how much you've borrowed in that period of time. So that tells you it is not really quite of a good, that is not, oh my, that is not really quite of a good bank to actually do business. Why? Because that can actually result to a very big problem. You borrow at over 23% and then you repay back. Can you imagine if then you had a problem in your business, you have a cash crunch, then you rush to your bank, maybe say perhaps you wanna, maybe you have some cargo, at the port, you want to get your cargo back or something, like you borrow for, like, let's say you borrow like $1 million in a period of 1 year. That's like 230,000 in a month, or rather in 1 year. That is quite not really a friendly price. But at times you find that these business people, they are doing it because they do not have an option of doing that period. I know you might argue, hey Joseph, I know you are quoting for 1 year. How about if you stretch that, say, in a longer period of time? It becomes a little bit friendlier. But at the end of the day, you're gonna pay a bigger interest. It's only that it has been distributed for a long period of time. But this one is quoted in terms of the personal loans that you take. Maybe probably you want to borrow, maybe you want to do some construction somewhere, you want to borrow. Some people do borrow at a personal level, not from a business level. But again, I always tell you, if you have to borrow from a bank, it is always advisable to actually borrow from the banks, from the business point of view than the personal point of view. Now, the other bank, or the number 4 bank, is the Middle East Bank. That one you have to pay an equivalent of 23,980 Kenyan shilling. That's around 23%-ish there, or over 20%, so to speak. And don't forget, when you're borrowing this money, we usually have a lot of hidden charges down there. I don't know, processing fee, I don't know what have you. Probably if you're borrowing like $1 million. How many of you here, you borrow $1 million, but whatever is credited in your bank account is like 800 and something thousand? Some you credited like 90,000, like 100 G's is gone for the processing and what have you. I totally understand. Banks are in business and there is nothing wrong with it. But hey, if you can afford that kind of a loan, then you can go ahead and borrow that amount of money. But I have to tell you, hey, if you go ahead and borrow from the Middle East Bank, be prepared that you're going to pay an equivalent of 23,980 Kenyan shilling as your interest. Number 4, that is the Access, number 5 actually, that is the Access Bank, and you're gonna pay an equivalent of 24,780 Kenyan shilling. The percentage is becoming worse and worse, if that makes sense, becoming bigger and bigger because of such kind of a thing, because the interest is actually bulging, becoming bigger, a bit unfriendly, and such kind of a thing. Let me not make this video a too long one. Let me just rush it so that I can finish up. The second worst, or the second most expensive bank to do business in Kenya, or personal loan to borrow from, it is actually a bank none other than the Guardian Bank. Can you imagine this? Are you prepared for the figure? 28,050 shilling. You tell me. We are almost to a 30%, isn't it? Can you imagine now if you're having that bank and you go borrow to do business? Tell me who has a business that has that return. Again, they are there. I'm not saying that they are not there. They are there. That's why I said, if you understand your business can be able to generate that equivalent, if you understand your business can be able to give that equivalent, then you can go ahead and borrow. But then if you know you cannot manage, and that's why, by the way, for your info, by the way, as I'm seated here, I'm heading to a meeting. When I meet with business people, they tell you, hey, Joseph, there is this loan that I've borrowed for my business has never gotten out of my shoulder. How do I do, or what happens? I borrow $1 million. I put it into, I buy stocks for my business. Then I'll manage to pay the loan comfortably. But once I finish to pay the loan, I do not have the stock. I'm still missing the stock that I had. Yeah, because whatever you borrowed to buy and whatever you sold it for, you exactly use that money to pay back the loan. That's why you find you are always in a cycle. Your business is not growing. You manage to pay the loan, but you are never out of debt. Otherwise, once you pay that loan, at the end of the day, you need another money to pump in. You go back to the same bank, you borrow. And I always tell people, whenever you're going to borrow, this is a tip I'm giving you. Whenever you go to borrow money, always understand that you have to make sure that you understand that you are borrowing against which numbers. Sometimes bank, they always tell you, hey, you can borrow against, say, you can borrow against, whatever comes in terms of the revenue. But you have to make sure that from the revenue, you have to do the deductions, the liabilities. You have to do the deduction of all those rather than just borrowing from just the revenue And then at the end of the day, the bank tells you, hey, you can afford, because we can see each and every week you have a stream of an equivalent of 100,000. Then from that, I see you can comfortably pay. Why? Because if you borrow this Y amount of money, it means you are supposed to pay, say, 40,000, and you have a revenue, say, of... So they just do that rough mathematics. They tell you your account looks good. It's always good to zoom in. If you do what we call the net revenue, or the revenue, the gross revenue, you do what is the gross profit, the net profit, then you borrow from the net profit. And then does your business have some reserves? Otherwise, you'll be in that cycle of borrowing and not actually progressing. The last one, but not the least, of course, is the CDN Bank. CDN Bank, if you borrow an equivalent of 100,000 for a period of 30 days, or rather 1 year, you're going to pay back 31,100 shilling. That is already beyond 30%. That is quite not a good return. Anyway, guys, those are 7 banks that I can tell you, if you're planning to borrow from them, then rethink, consider, and find out, hey, what can you do? Can you renegotiate yourself? I'm not saying that you shouldn't open those bank accounts. You can go ahead and do so. This is not, it is just me reporting, you know. You can go ahead and open those accounts, but always sit down and negotiate the what? Negotiate the interest. Find out, tell them how much comes in and whatever, how it is. Just talk. These are human beings. You can talk to them. And sometimes I understand why they are charging that, because some of the loans that they issue, it's unsecured loans. By the way, if you don't know, as we speak right now, we have a lot of NPLs. Those are non-performing loans, meaning it's a money borrowed. People are not paying back. And you can totally understand. Some people are saying, hey, there is a high economic pressure. We are not able to do that and what have you. That is totally understandable. So for that matter, guys, I really hope you've benefited out of this video. And I really hope, again, go ahead and subscribe, hit that like button, make sure that you leave a comment on the comment section. See you in the next one.